I gotta go vegan. I gotta go vegan. Hang on, is this a new Stevie Wonder classic? Go vegan. Go vegan. Go vegan.
My name is James O'Donovan. I'm from Cork, and myself and Bronwyn Slater, we produce Vegan Sustainability magazine. So we have a website where we're gathering kind of reports on just the huge impact of veganism on environmental issues, on biodiversity, on climate change, on antibiotic use. Just trying to get quality information, bring it together and make it available.
Hi, before I start, can I just say that it's great to be here, but also to thank the organisers and the tech people and all that for another brilliant Vegfest. So come and have So my name is Roger Yates. I've been an ethical vegan since 1979, mainly involved in the grassroots, although I've had some experience with national groups. I'm quite critical of those in actual fact. I've also done a little bit of academia, so my MA was about the British animal protection movement, and my PhD was about the support pillars of speciesism, which are theology, philosophy and everyday social practice. So that's kind of me in a kind of nutshell. I'm working at the moment for the Vegan Information Project, all volunteer group based in Dublin, and we do an 8-hour outreach event every Thursday in Temple Bar Square. So if you're ever in Dublin, come and see us. Cheers.
Hi, I'm Evelyn, and I'm much less impressive than that. I'm a vegan, is what people call me, a vegan hun. I have a blog with my two best friends. We consider ourselves like eco-feminist vegans, but really we're just eating chocolate and posting about it. I'm also an animal rights artist. I do work with the Art of Compassion project. So we paint pictures and we get them published in magazines to spread awareness and have exhibitions raising money for various animal rights charities. And today I'm repping NARA, the National Animal Rights Association, which is a volunteer-run charity based in Dublin. Specifically, I've been talking about fur farming today, but we campaign against all forms of animal exploitation.
Hello, my name's Brett. Online I'm known as Epi Vegan. And what I'm all about is cooking and just introducing people to vegan food to try and impact as many people as possible. I just want people to eat more plants and eat less animals. That's ultimately, I want no animals to suffer from anything that we can help. So online I cook for any celebrities that go vegan. I will invite them into my home and cook for them while I interview them. And interviewing people and cooking for them is my favourite thing to do, so that's my preferred method of activism. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Amy and I'm from Donegal. I run the blog and YouTube channel Green Leafy Gale. I went vegan 5 years ago, and when I was living in Spain, and then I spent my first year as a full 100% vegan living in England. So when I got back to Ireland, to Donegal, I realised that veganism wasn't really a known thing. People didn't know anything about how you don't actually need as much protein as we think. So I started my blog and YouTube channel to try and normalise veganism in Ireland, to try and show me living a normal everyday life but eating differently and eating the right way is what I saw it. And I also like to kind of do blogs and, well, mainly vlogs in Irish, so I speak Irish, and I like to also promote the Irish language through my vegan channel and blog. And I also do a little bit of like sustainable fashion, cruelty-free beauty, try and get a bit of sustainability and like zero plastic lifestyle. So I cover all those things on my Instagram, blog and YouTube. And starting just today, I'm starting to do vegan coaching. So if I know anybody from Ireland who is thinking about going vegan and who doesn't really know how to do it, send them over to my blog, greenleafygale.com, and from there I will be able to assist them through the transition period. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Nicole Matthews. I'm one of the directors with the Irish Council Against Blood Sports. We work against the blood sports here at home, but as well as overseas too. We've been involved in campaigns against the bull trade in the likes of Spain and Portugal and Greece, for bullfighting and the horrible circumstances surrounding that. And here from home, mainly it's my passion is the greyhounds. And we have a rescue greyhound with the name of Legend who came from Shanghai, from the slaughterhouses. He was next on the list to be slaughtered for human consumption. And he's basically living proof that this is very real within the industry, that our dogs are being sent to the likes of China and through kind of roundabout destination spots, you know, but that's where the goal, the destination, the final destination is in Asia. And it's an enormous issue, and it's really a separate issue that the greed and the arrogance of the greyhound industry here at home has created. And it's now gone way out of their hands, and we're trying to pull it back in and to stop it from the foundations here at home, to stop the exports of our greyhounds, unless it's to exports within proven rescue and independent of the industry. I'm vegan as well. This Yulin will be 4 years. I have 3 children who are vegan 3 years. My husband as well, my eldest daughter is here with me today. We have a vegan family page, and I guess I never really put the phrase in it before, but yeah, it's vegan coaching. That's the new title. So basically, when we first went vegan, there wasn't the whole same social media kind of following, and you know, it wasn't such a hot spot, I guess, back then. So people were very curious, and you know, the hows and the wheres and the whys. So we put the page together, you know, in terms of, you know, just every day, how you live, day to day, meal to meal, incorporating, you know, all the necessary requirements for the children through their milestones, which people sometimes are bamboozled by, and they're afraid, they don't even know where to begin. So we just showed, you know, the slight little tweaks, you know, and it's just those first couple of shopping trips, and before you know it, it's just a different routine, and that's how easy it is to make different choices, and it's a stepping stone. So we showed, you know, our home-cooked kind of family favourite meals, the kids' school lunches, breakfast, how to incorporate chia seeds and things like that through, you know, flaxseed, linseed, through the omegas and all of that kind of thing, and what they need. High fibre, and just, you know, right across the board as well in terms of household products, cruelty-free, vegan products, Irish companies as well as overseas as well, and just to incorporate, so it's everything on our Facebook page, Kind Heart Conscious Planet, to do with a vegan lifestyle and living really with, you know, your heart first is how we kind of phrase it.
So, we have an amazing panel of people. Can I open up the floor to questions? Please ask questions. You don't have these people for very long.
Hey guys, I was wondering, because you all kind of, well, most of you had a good online presence, what's the main form of criticism or kind of angry messages you would get, or what kind of, I don't know, what do you come up against a lot, I suppose?
What's the hate?
I'd love to say that one. So I think one of the biggest issues in our community as a whole, I mean, I'm assuming there's a lot of vegans here, is criticising people for not being vegan enough. So recently we've had people online such as Beyonce who've talked about veganism in the media with a massive online following, millions and millions of followers, but the first comments on her page when she does that is calling her a fur hag because she still wears fur. Now, I don't agree with fur at all, and I'd love everyone in the world to be 100% vegan, but when someone gives us a stepping stone and an inlet into media on a mass scale such as Beyonce, I think it's for our community to get behind them and help to kindly educate them on the other things that they might be doing that are still very harmful, whilst also saying, well done for getting the name of veganism out there and actually encouraging people, because the more people that we turn off to it, and I don't know if people know that Jamie Oliver wanted to go vegan until someone said that they wanted to kill his kids because he still killed animals. And that's the easiest way to turn someone off, is to say something so silly as you want to kill their kids when they're someone who's talking about going vegan. And one of the biggest chefs in the world going vegan would be a massive online presence for veganism. So I think that's something that in our community we need to really think about and maybe approach with some tact and intelligence. I don't know, anyone else wants to talk about how they're criticised?
I had something happen I shared something on my personal page by accident recently. It was an image of a chicken in a slaughterhouse, and it kind of like zoomed into the chicken's eyes, and you could see the fear in that chicken's face as it was going to be next to be slaughtered, and it had its like chicken sisters and brothers behind it being slaughtered. And I shared that on my personal page, which I try not to because some of my old friends definitely don't get veganism. And one of my close friends wrote up, "Sure, it's only a chicken," and a laughing face. And that kind of attitude is obviously, it's very common, but it's not one that I understand in any possible way, that somebody could look at a live animal in pain and make a joke about it. And I wrote back, and I'll not say what I said because there's children here, but he wrote back with a fish hook as if to say I caught the bait of the joke. But regardless of whether I caught any bait, if you are ignorant enough to make a joke about the suffering of another animal, it doesn't matter if I took the bait or if I didn't take the bait, it's just a wrong thing to do. But it's that attitude or that lack of compassion that I think is like cognitive dissonance, would you call it that? Roger probably knows this better than me. But I think that is definitely a big problem, and it's probably the fundamental issue is that there's a lot of people in this world who just have not clicked yet that these are living beings and that just haven't grasped the compassion or haven't connected the dots yet. And I think that is a major problem, that's something that I see very often with like old kind of friends when they would comment under my sort of stuff. Thanks.
I can say something. Like from the environmental side, often the kind of arguments you get are, how's the industry going to change? We have an awful lot of people working already in the meat industry. Is this going to put a lot of people out of work? You know, it's difficult to change these systems. But in Europe, you know, in developed countries, beef industry, sheep industry, the meat industry is massively heavily subsidized. We know there's huge costs already for health and stuff like that. So economically, there's way more arguments, more supporting a transition to veganism. So still there's an awful lot of ingrained misunderstandings that we need. For example, we need cows in order to keep environments healthy, you know, whereas, you know, there's huge potential. Animal agriculture dominates basically the planet's available landscape now, and biodiversity populations are shrinking down. So there's, by transitioning to a vegan agri-food system, the potential to deal with issues like climate change is there. So slowly you just have to start to, I think you just have to take every kind of criticism patiently and just try to put the information out there. And now the quality of the information is there to more than support the transition. So it's just kind of trying to get that information out there steadily is what it's about.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel? Or
I'd just like to add something, just in terms of rescue. We need the backing of the government to make adequate changes, you know, on a grassroots level. And especially in terms of the greyhounds, people don't understand that they're actually deemed livestock. So they're not legally entitled to the same protection as other breeds. And it gives the industry, you know, a whole other warped way of treating them, and you know, it's away from the public eye, and we really want to change that. But we find as well that just in terms of, you know, kind of going against you, it's actually by times it's the system itself that goes against us in rescue and in terms of trying to change things at a legislation level. You know, and that's just one example where the animals are deemed livestock, and you know, we know from other species as well what that entails, and it's just the same for greyhounds. So in terms of, you know, being involved in rescue and in welfare, but being vegan, my hope is to break down those barriers and to extend the compassion to other species as well, you know, because it's very easy for people to extend the compassion to dogs and to cats, but we're trying to, you know, break that mould and to spread it further afield. But we come up against that arrogance and that kind of blockade from our TDs and from our councillors, where it's completely dismissed. You know, by times there's even that kind of a sniggery kind of, you know, they wouldn't take us serious, they would say that what we talk about isn't true, you know, that kind of element, where it's very much so proven There are, you know, through the greyhounds, tattoos in their ears and that, there are traceabilities within the dog and cat meat trade of the slaughterhouses in China for human consumption. So I think for them to actually tackle that and to acknowledge that is our biggest battle in change here at home. So the bullies are within the dog.
Thank you. Thanks, Amelia. Persistence is the key, I think. Anybody else want a question? There you go.
What is the best advice you have for talking to your friends or family who have kids, who are raising their kids on a diet that you don't agree with? And also that kind of leads into, you've had friends for so long and they are your best friends, your heart and soul, the people you grew up with, but they just don't recognise the lifestyle you're living. How can you get them on board? So that's kind of two questions, but has anybody any advice?
Does anyone want to say this or can I? Go for it. I think the easiest way to get through to anyone about anything is to appeal to their ego. So, I mean, to actually talk to them about their own health and to actually talk about that cardiovascular diseases start in the womb. So, to test on children that have just been born, if the mother eats a lot of saturated fats, especially from animal products, the child will already have hardening arteries. So to talk to them about that and the fact that they may have already actually damaged their child due to their own choices, that they could have chose something else. It's a very, very difficult subject because no one wants to be told how to raise their own children. And I deal with the same thing with my brother, who is raising his child on not a vegan diet. But yeah, I think the number one thing which I'll always say is to keep open lines of communication, because no matter how they react to it, if you get upset and angry and emotional and then cut bridges or burn the bridges, then you cease to have an effect on their life anymore. So as you're someone who's already found a different way of life that's less harmful to the environment and to the things that live in it, then you want to be the change in their life. So try and keep open lines of communications and try not to get frustrated with it.
As a mother who is raising a vegan child, I didn't have to deal with a lot of criticism, but with a lot of questions for sure. People around me tend to say that I'm very patient. I keep just explaining, and it's very rare that I lose my patience. I think it gets me to the point, it has to get to the point that it's the same joke or it's the same talk over and over until I really say, like, that's wrong, that's just, it's not funny. So with my son, my parents were very supportive, so I think I was lucky enough, but a lot of people around don't understand, in the community, in the schools. So it's about, and one of the things that I mentioned in my talk earlier today is like, the question or the sentence, the statement I get a lot is like, you're forcing your beliefs in your child. And I always find this statement quite funny, because being a parent, especially to young children, we raise them the way we choose to raise them. So I was fed meat because my parents would eat meat. I was baptized because my parents were Catholics. And that's what we do until they are able to choose. We make the choice for them. And I don't understand why when we raise a child vegan, suddenly it's a problem. We are doing as any other parent in the world. We are just spreading our choices. And I do think, like, one thing that I really do, it's the explanation, it's the education. I don't want my child to go around saying, I'm not allowed to eat this. It's like, it is my choice because I understand the reasons. And he does, he's 6 years old, he's very outspoken about it. I can see the compassion, I can see the respect on him. And when, it's another thing as well, I think sometimes when I say, people don't take it that seriously, but when he says, with that honesty in his heart, they take it more serious than me, because they just think, oh, you're just forcing that. But they can see, like, he's happy, he's thriving as any other child. So we're not doing anything wrong, we're not doing anything out of the world, we're not the first people in the world to raise them. People have been raising kids vegan since the 70s, the 60s. It's more spread today, and I think it borders more people because it's getting bigger. And it is a big change, it's a big change of habits for a lot of people, it's a big change of values. So I'm all about honesty, but respect and kindness. You do lose your patience sometimes. It gets to the point that the jokes are disrespectful, and then I think you need to be firm if it gets to this point of disrespect towards you. But my main point always is try to be respectful and kind, because that's the world you want for everybody, not just for the animals, but for human beings as well. Being vegan is about respect, love, and compassion to all beings. So for me, that's the message that we want to spread for the new generations. And education. You know, we need education to change the world about everything. So that's for me the main point is that.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I can say a couple of things on that. Speaking as a sociologist, I think the question was getting at kind of how do you speak to your family about veganism? That's part of it. The brutal fact about that is that if you're a family member, you might be the worst person to talk to other family members about veganism, or any really moral issue, and veganism is a moral issue. And so they might take the very same message better from a stranger than from you, and that's just the reality of the situation. There's the reason for that is there's a lot of family baggage that goes on in family relations, and so you're talking to siblings, and it's kind of who are you to talk tell me and all that kind of stuff. Then there's also a kind of generational thing, which is the flip over of the usual situation. Normally, morality is taught by the elders to the youngers, the young members of the family. In veganism, because there's so many young people in it, you've often got young people trying to talk morality to people who are older than them, and that doesn't necessarily go well. And so it's just a general point that if you want to talk to your family about veganism, you might not be the best person to do it.
Thank you very much.
That's very true.
I would say one small thing on that. Is that one gone? So one of the things we do is we try and model good behavior, and just by example, when you, like somebody said, keeping an open channel of communication. So when there's that caring relationship that we have to our family and our friends, that has to stay. We remember ourselves when we weren't vegan. It took education, it took insight for us to learn to change our own behavior. So having that understanding, just, we're not perfect, we're not saints, we just try and keep that connection with the person. Otherwise, like, in terms of broader changes, I do think that we have to kind of, you can see at these festivals now, there's lots of people coming, but we need to organize together in order to kind of build the system. Like, we know there's all these, events, that we see continually, whether it's live exports, whether it's, animal experimentation, all these things are continuing, but in order to change them, you have to come down to your beliefs. So it comes down to ethics, it comes down to seeing the value of an animal's life, then not wanting to injure any of those living beings, and then that gives you a lot of energy to drive your behavior and to sustain your behavior over a longer term. But in order for us to change some of the systems and structures in the country, like this movement is a key environmental movement, although sometimes people aren't so motivated by that factor, but maybe it's the key environmental movement. But we need to kind of, I think, come together, support existing organisations that are in Ireland working to do this work more, and then see how we can drive the change forward, building, new models. That's kind of a direction we need to go in.
I might just say that, I think you've hit it on the nail there, that if you lead by example, while that can be a very slow process, sometimes I tell myself, all my best friends are vegan, and my partner is vegan, and I've got vegans in my family, and we have an entirely vegan Christmas dinner now, and sometimes I'm so lucky. But that did not at all happen overnight. I gave up meat 16 years ago, and it was a struggle. And I've got my parents over in the corner who I know gave out to me loads when I told them I was giving up meat, and they were like, "You're going to die of lack of protein," all that kind of stuff. But once there's someone in your life who is vegan, I think you just have to remind yourself that you're on the right side. I hope, I think everyone can agree with that. We're at Vegfest. If you're doing the right thing, everyone's going to come round eventually. It sounds like a very passive thing, but just you know, keep doing the right thing, keep your friends around, they'll cop on at some point.
Can I just add, just in terms of, you know, not just with friends and family, but on a wider kind of a circle then, so a lot like events or, you know, vigils where you're dealing with people, you know, that work within the slaughterhouses, you know, the side of trucks, or delivery guys, you know, driving the slaughter trucks, that kind of thing, or even farmers that are within the industry that we're kind to try to, you know, see fall back and, you know, create an evolution really that we know wholeheartedly, you know, for mind, body and soul is the way forward. We can't sustain the way that we, you know, we mistreat our planet. It's just, it's not practical, aside from ethical or moral. So I think delivery of the message is everything. I think when something comes from a place of judgment, and I've seen it happen, and you know that the cogs are coming off the conversation, and you know, you can see just it all falling apart in front of you. And I think instinctively, us as a species, if we feel judged, if we feel that the finger is pointed, we automatically, our instinct is to go to a place of defence, and the barrier is up. Before the sentence is even finished, you've lost them. So I think, you know, sometimes even just to say, if that's how you feel, I get you, you know, but this is where I'm coming from, and if you have any question marks, I'm always there if you want to, you know, hit me up, or this is where you can find me, or, you know, and for them to see your vibe. Our vibe is everything, you know, and, you know, why not live in a way that's just love, you know, in comparison to, I think their body language in terms of yours, if you were to stand out and take an out-of-body experience, tells you everything that you need to know from the conversation. You know, so just if you feel the cogs are, you know, coming apart like that, and you're losing your reason, or you're getting agitated, just look outside of yourself and look at the situation, and, you know, what's happening with them and the aggression, where they're coming from, it's coming from a place of defence, you know, but you're coming from a place of love, so just allow it be and step back a little rather than make it worse, because sometimes that just doesn't help.
Thank you. We have a question here.
Thank you. I just want to shift the focus to advocacy in a sense of changing laws, because as with the greyhound issue, we have seen that laws need to be changed. I think Ireland is one of those countries that still have animal circuses with live animals. It's one of the few countries in Europe. Veganism has gotten more awareness now, but this kind of intersects with a post-truth world where people have it much easier to ignore facts. They can section themselves off into social media. So we're peaking at an odd time when it comes to awareness. I would just like to get a sense from the advocates here on the panel, where are we in sort of getting laws changed? Is it a good time? Is it a better time? Or is it a bad timing at the moment?
Want to take that? Well, in terms of changing legislation, you know, it's the people that vote. And we all now we're very privileged in the communication outlets that we have. You know, while we sit here, you know, we have the world in our pockets on a device that we didn't have 10 years ago. And we need to utilise that, you know, in the right channels. And I think people often feel, you know, kind of overwhelmed by, you know, the process of change, and how can I be, you know, another domino in that whole evolution, and, you know, I'm not going to do anything, so they will sit back and they will leave it to other people to fight for them. But we're at a standpoint now where that's no longer, you know, it's no longer a get-out card. You know, we all have a responsibility, and if we want to really aspire to change, then, you know, we need to be active in that pursuit. So I think in terms of legislation, we sat with in the Oireachtas, ourselves with the Irish Council Against Blood Sports, and we had Grey, the Greyhound Rescue Association of Ireland, who also kind of double up with HUG, which are Homes for Unwanted Greyhounds. And it was put to us from the Oireachtas, which, you know, really floored us. They themselves had no understanding how rescue worked. Now, they call themselves greyhound men. You know, some of them are breeders, some of them are trainers, some of them are friends with people high up within the industry. So they all vote for their constituents, you know, and they look for keeping their bums in the doll and their pensions coming down the line, and that's where their priority lies. So we need to get under their skin, you know, and let them see that the world is changing. So they can either fight against us or they can help us, and in the long run, you know, it only benefits them if longevity is their, you know, primary focus. Because now people are getting more active, you know, and they're not they're not as shy to stand back, you know, to come out to an event, to a campaign, and to protest, and, you know, to get out on the street and be active is not, it's not so much, you know, a taboo kind of a thing now. You know, people are very proud, and we're seeing, you know, the likes of the close, the shut down the slaughterhouses campaigns. People are travelling from all corners of the country to do that, and the industries are taking notice, you know, because...
I'm very interested in that. I think there's a high percentage of feminists are vegan because of the identification with the suppression and also the exploitation of the female reproductive organs in the dairy and the egg industry. So what I'm going to do is, if you could put your hand up if anybody has a question, and while I'm going to look for questions, could you say anything about your own ecofeminism, please?
Yeah, well, I get the question all the time, like, because, you know, everyone I know is a feminist. I live in a bit of a liberal bubble, to be honest, in my little Fairview area in Dublin. But whenever I come across a feminist who isn't vegan, they really question this idea. They're like, the two things don't go hand in hand. They've always gone hand in hand. My current pet project I'm on at the moment is reading about the vegetarian society in the early 20th century and the suffragist movement. All these amazing women who were fighting for the right to vote, but also they happen to be vegetarian. They don't happen to be vegetarian. They just realize that just because something's traditional, like, you know, men ruling the world or humans ruling the world, it doesn't make it right. So I had a friend recently, well, she gave out to me for implying that, you know, in order to be a true feminist, you had to accept the rights of other species as well. She was like, no, 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 no. And I said to her, I was like, well, what gives men the right to dictate over women? And she said, nothing. And I said, and what gives humans the right to dictate over all other species? And yeah, she was stumped. It's all these traditions, and once you question one, you question the other. So I do think very much the things go hand in hand. And some really interesting people to read up on, just because I've been studying them at the moment, are Eva Gore-Booth and Charlotte Despard and Margaret Cousins. Margaret Cousins set up the Irish Women's Franchise League sometime between 1900 and 1910, looking for women to get the right to vote. And she was also president of the Irish Vegetarian Society, honorary president here. So they've always gone hand in hand. It's just a matter of questioning the system that's in place, questioning whether it's right, that just because you have the ability to dominate over someone else, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And it's something that I think once you question one, you start questioning the other. And that friend, just to end that story, we got into kind of a heated argument, and I stormed out of the room, as I do. And she came up to me later that day, and she was like, I'm sorry, I'm just feeling really guilty. And I feel like you've won at that stage. Like, she hasn't given up meat, but she's feeling guilty about it. So the seed has been planted, and I'll just wait.
That's great.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that, because feminism gets linked to veganism a lot, mainly because of the reproductive system of animals that's massively, it's just massively abused. The interesting thing about it is that's a very strong link, but the males in the industry normally get put in a grinder. So both sexes are massively abused. I really think the feminist movement's massive in veganism, though, and I think it's such a powerful part of the movement. I think that the female perspective and feminism in general puts things across from a different angle. I think it's really, really useful. It's really interesting that it's still about an 80-20 split of 80% females feminists to 20% men. I think one of the main reasons of that is it's not seen as a masculine thing to do. I think as a masculine trait, it's to stand up for others. And if you can't stand up for the weaker species that's being abused and enslaved, then that doesn't make you a man at all. So that's something that I think people need to consider when they talk to people about veganism and how it is a masculine thing to do. And if they are masculine, they consider themselves a real human being and not just a man, then they should stick up for everyone. So.
Thank you, that's great. Equality and interconnectedness, feminist care ethics, I think would go there. We should be supporting each other equally. But I do, of course.
I'm saying they're both important.
No, I totally get it, and thank you for that.
Just in terms of the kind of the vile side of taking advantage of the female reproductive kind of cycle, and the whole breastfeeding side of thing, and how the dairy industry is. It's not just like when our grandparents were around, they'd have maybe if they lived in the country, they might have a goat and they'd use it for it was a small thing. Now the fact it's a Frankenstein industry is what we're dealing with. It's genetically modified breeds that will be fatter and that will produce more milk on top of extra hormones that they are laden with, to further stimulate the letdown, and so that they'll milk quicker and release more milk at a quicker stage. And in turn then it just makes the animals very obviously burn out quicker. So we're seeing as well, the species that are being butchered and killed at a much quicker rate than they used to be generations back. So the fact that it's gone industrialised and, it's so huge an industry now, we are still ingesting all of that. So I think, in terms of the dairy as well, it's something that we're given to our infants, from a very young age as newborns. And, all of those pesticides, all of those, lipids and fats, and that influx in GMO chemicals, and it's just such a toxic cocktail. And I think in terms of feminism, it needs to start too as a protection for our next generation, for men and for women, for fathers to be just as adamant that they just don't want that in their children's lives. We know now the domino effect, whereas years ago they didn't understand what was coming. Now we know the horrific diseases, and they're only getting worse. And these strains of illnesses are incredibly clever and much faster at adapting to their environments and their whatever wash of chemicals is being put in on top of them, then to reduce them at cell level to try and reverse the likes of cancers and things like that. So it comes back to the feminism as well, what you're saying too, for men and for women. Roger.
I think it should be said essentially that the strongest link between feminism and veganism is they're both justice movements, and that needs to be said. And you can be forgiven to not know this, I suppose, but the vegan movement is actually a very radical, revolutionary idea, and it was made by revolutionaries. We're talking about people in the 1940s, when World War II was still on. They declared peace through veganism. They saw it as part of the peace movement, and they also saw veganism as part of the moral evolution of humanity. The pioneers of the vegan social movement saw that if we had a vegan world, it would be radically changed in the sense that there should be no domestic violence and rape and violence across the board. This is what links veganism with other justice movements. And that radicalism is often subsumed in the fact that everybody likes the cupcakes, and a lot of people talk about it being a diet and all this kind of stuff, which is not true. A lot of people talk about veganism as being just about other animals, which is also not true. The overarching vision of the vegan social movement pioneers was intersectional in nature, as is ecofeminism, and so we are talking about a very radical idea here, and so that's why it resonates with other justice movements.
James?
There was a big change. A lot of the industries at the end of the Second World War, they were making weapons, they were making chemicals, and a lot of those industries, the very same industries, continued, and then they started to make agricultural poisons. So there was a big, even today, in small-scale farmers around the world produce most of the world's food, whereas in developing countries we produce huge areas of animal feed and then convert them to meat products, getting only tiny quantities of food out. So in these, people like Vandana Shiva in India, different people have also pointed out that the shift also is partly from you know, seeing soil as a living, you know, soil has it's a soil microbiome. We have a microbiome inside of ourselves. Plants and the soil microbiome interact with each other. Like half of the sugars that plants produce, they feed to the soil microbiome. Then the soil microbiome is taking the micronutrients out of the soil and feeding it to the plants. So when you eat that plant food, it's whole and balanced. So cultures understood that before, and they lived more in harmony. So it's also a part of moving kind of from agriculture as war, you know, destroying insects, fighting and so forth, also moving towards living in harmony with nature. So that's also part of the movement, that's part of veganism.
Harmony and balance, yeah. Gail, can I ask you a question? I haven't heard from you for a while. You're a native Irish speaker, and I know that you do Irish blogs as Gaeilge. Just wondering, do you have much of a following in the native Irish speaking community?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Well, because there's not a lot of native Irish speakers, I don't know how I could scale this to say yes, there are a lot of them, but a lot of my followers do follow me because I speak Irish, and actually I get the best feedback from my Irish speaking followers because they love the fact that somebody's speaking Irish on social media and making it kind of like a normal thing, making it cool. Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm doing that, but just the fact that I'm just speaking Irish without being at school and a teacher telling me to. So the best feedback I get is definitely from my Irish speaking followers, so I know I do have a lot of Irish speaking followers, and that's why they follow me, which makes me happy too, because I don't know if they were vegan before they followed me, but maybe they follow me as an Irish speaker and then that introduced them to veganism. But in terms of numbers, I don't know. I hope there's a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, does anybody have... we got loads of questions.
Sorry, I was just wondering in terms of a vegan lifestyle with pets, how do you feel about feeding them meat or fish as a pet food, or is there a vegan, vegetarian alternative for dogs and cats?
There are many, yeah. Unfortunately, the majority are available online, and like the majority of, you know, kind of, aside from the norm, you know, whole foods kind of foods, they'll be more expensive, you know, as in the general kind of run of things. It is available. There's one in particular that I would highly recommend. It's called Veggie, and I always mix up the name of the pet store. Anybody familiar with the pet store that's down in Liffey Valley? What's it called again? Maxi Zoo. They carry it, and it's a fabulous big bag. They do a 9 kg, 2.5 kg, and a 12 kg bag, and the 9 kg is only €40. So it's really, really high quality. You know, there's lots of essential oils inside of it. It's all, you know, proper plant-based ingredients. The crude ash as well, which is something crude ash in an ingredient in a pet food is basically if it's burnt, what remains, what's left behind. So it's the waste of the waste as such. And the percentages are so low within that by comparison to a standard food, you know, which only tells a tale in itself as well. My dogs were on it for a long, long time. One of our long-haired German Shepherds at the minute is in the limbo health-wise, and it's all predisposed and genetic because he's a German Shepherd. They're very susceptible, big breeds, to bone marrow cancers and things like that, and arthritis with the back hip. So at the moment he's on CBD oil, which is a pure form of hemp oil, which is miraculous, is the only way that I can describe it. It's absolutely fantastic. So plant-based in terms of animals is almost immediately recognisable, the difference. They don't smell as, you know, that dog smell, even when they're wet. There's that, it's just a cleaner, you know, their breath doesn't smell as badly, they don't poo as much either, you know, which goes to show you that they're ingesting everything, you know, they're pulling all those nutrients out and it's going somewhere as opposed to just flushing through their system. They have a tendency not to drink as much water as well as they would do on a standard diet, and I've seen the comparison between, because of all the added salts and the additives and the preservatives and the colours that are put in on top of this, you know, the green artificial pea look, you know, that goes through a dry meal. But just in terms of, you know, raw and plant foods as well, now there are some that are toxins, you know, so you have to do your homework on it too, the likes of garlic and avocado because of the pectin and There's some kind of things that you eat. Raisins, you have to avoid. Obviously chocolate, you know, which is the more common thing that's known, but it is doable. Some people choose to cook. My take on it is that basically you're bringing it back to, you know, how they would have eaten in the wild in a wolf state before we domesticated, you know, our pets. And, you know, so when, obviously taking aside the meat side of things, but when a wolf or a fox takes down, you know, their prey, the first thing they will eat is the contents of the stomach. And that is pre-digested, and, you know, it's plant-based. And that is what they'll go for first. It lines their gut and it helps digestion, and it slows down the quicker metabolism breakdown and rush through their system that the meat will give then afterwards. So the longevity for their diets is based on plant-based in the wild anyway. So in a home environment, personally, I would rather give it raw. I blend it up, I make it into a soup consistency. You can add in coconut water, you know, which only replaces then through panting and through sweating or exercise the electrolytes and the salts that they lose naturally, you know, through overexertion. Almond yogurt is another fantastic one, coconut yogurt. And basically what you're doing is you're mimicking that soup consistency that would have been within their prey back in the day in the stomachs, pre-digested. Because if you give them, you know, raw fruit and veg, it takes a long time to pass through their gut. So what you're going to do is you're going to blitz it up, you're going to liquefy it, make it like a soup, and they will drink it then, you know, and it's just fantastic for them. But if you're looking for a kibble, you know, or for a dry meal, there are ones out there, yeah. And all you can do is kind of, you know, get a small bag, shop around, see what suits them. Like us all, some, you know, we like some things and don't like others. We'll find one that sticks. But definitely that one from Max's, it was one that immediately stuck with ours, and they thrived on it.
Thanks a million, Nicole, highlighting the benefits of CBD oil, which is great. Do we have a question here?
How are you doing? Just a quick question there. So a lot of people, I'm guessing, are vegan in this room, and we all had a moment, like if we had a conversation with someone or we watched something, it was a light bulb moment to make us see the light. So for example, you no longer want to contribute to animal exploitation, and as you dive further into it, you look at the environmental factors, the health. And my question is, you know, with social media, as you mentioned, and the further you go into it, you know, you have a lot of, you know, you see a lot of things you don't want to see. It can give you, you know, stress. You can feel kind of, you'll have days where you go to bed and you're just not loving the world at all, and you're feeling a bit burnt out. I'm just wondering, is that something you've come across, or if there's any observation on that?
In terms of feeling burnt out?
Just dejected. Do you know, like with...
I can just say, like, I think you have to, just like with any media, you have to be careful the volume of negative stories you're going to look at, you know. Like when you want to change a system, one way, like you can look at all the negative things in the system, but also you can just have a vision for a new positive system and work on building that. So I do think that you have to have some kind of practice, you know, whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, whether it's movement, whether it's art, that you're using for your own journey of personal development, you know. So like, I think every human has tendencies for anger, hatred, ill will, and we have tendencies for compassion, loving kindness, generosity. So we're trying to cultivate those positive qualities. So I think having a practice, you know, to understand your own emotions, and then also doing something, getting involved so that you're contributing in some small way, it doesn't have to be a big deal. They're things that I have found helpful.
Yeah, so when you said about looking at stuff online and watching videos that might leave you feeling burnt out and things like that.
I just mean a bit checked out, like, you know, a bit checked out.
A bit checked out. Sorry, I don't fully...
Like seeing too much food, like seeing too much animal cruelty videos or something like that.
Yeah, personally, now that I've gone vegan, I protect myself on that more, because I don't feel like I need to make more of a change. I don't know, so.
Well, I
a day the other day where I came home and I literally just lay down on the floor for ages. I was so exhausted. Oh, you know what I'd been doing? I'd spent the last 3 hours watching footage of fur farms. So that will do. I was burnt out or checked out that day. And on top of this, like, we're having everything at once this month. I've been reading about fur farms. We have a referendum coming up. It's all been a lot. Just keep pushing through. I don't know what else to say. Like, this is reality. I'd love to just close my eyes and stick my head in the sand, but I think once your head is out of the sand, it just has to stay out of it. You know, sometimes we say to ourselves, it'd be great to be ignorant of all these injustices in the world, and it would be. It would be blissful at times, but that's not an option. While it's still going on, we have to be aware that it's going on. And yeah, I totally understand when you just need to stick on some trash TV and call it a day. But I think keep pushing through, keep coming back to it, and keep getting burnt out. Because if you're getting burnt out, you're doing something hard, and if you're doing something hard, you're doing the right thing. Woo.
Trauma is an issue within the community, and I would recommend that people would probably check out the work of Casey Taft, and he's online on Facebook. This is Casey Tyler. So if you go to Vegan Publishers, you can see a video where he talks about trauma, and there's a recent Live Vegan podcast in which he talks about it as well. Effectively, we stay engaged, we keep learning, but we don't have to torture ourselves. You know, and we don't have to re-traumatize ourselves. And if you're watching Earthlings every day, you're making a mistake. There's no need to do that. Earthlings is not for vegans, you know. And if a new thing comes out like Dominion that's coming out in Australia, you don't have to watch it. You already know what it's about. It's not for vegans, okay? So you don't have to. It's not a duty. And if anyone says, well, the animals have gone through it, so you must watch it, that's bullshit. You don't have to do that. You don't have to torture yourself. We have to stay healthy to fight.
Thank you, Roger. That's nice. I think we live in a really crazy world where there's a lot of backwards things going on, and there's a lot of us who are more sensitive than others. And mindfulness is the new buzzword. But yeah, just I don't think you have to force yourself to watch all that stuff either. So thank you for that.
I just finished my 4-year degree in public health, and climate change and, say, like killing animals for me is entirely unsustainable. However, I was never taught that in the 4 years of the degree. It was never even mentioned. We had one module in first year that focused on environmental sort of issues, and that was it. It was a 5-credit module. It really wasn't looked at, and even though my degree was more medically focused, if the issue around like the harmfulness of eating meat or dairy was brought up, it was very, very quickly dismissed and sort of like moved along. Any sort of these issues that were brought up in my university career were very much dismissed. I was wondering what you would kind of say to someone in academia, or how to introduce or integrate these big issues into academia, because even though I've been vegan for 2 years, I did that on my own accord. I found that out through my own research. That was never brought up in my degree, which is in public health, and all these issues are very, very fundamental to public health. So I was kind of wondering what you would say to integrate sort of the promotion of a vegan lifestyle, and not just a vegan lifestyle, but more awareness around environmental issues, or what the impact of eating meat and dairy does for public health.
Can I take that one? Just in terms of raising my own children vegan, it sometimes has come up, you know, in the likes of, you know, their general kind of clinic checks and milestones and stuff like that. And Daisy, as a baby, had a touch of eczema, and we were at a GP stood in one time on a general health check, and her eczema was mentioned, and you know, I was asked what were we doing productively to kind of, you know, to maintain it, and you know, why was it, you know, doing as good as it was, that kind of vibe. And I told him that we had taken her off dairy, and instantly he pushed back from his chair, 2 hands came down on the table, and I just thought, oh, here we go. I'd had a long day, I just wasn't in the mood to go there with him, and You know, he called himself a nutritionalist, but he had no understanding of the amount of calcium that was in, you know, green leafy veg. So when he asked me where my children, and looked at me as if I was doing something wrong to my children in terms of, you know, their requirements for, you know, maintaining bone and teeth and, you know, calcium as their bodies grow and stuff like that, it really only proved to me that in terms of the medical sector and the education sector, they really need to be re-educated themselves. So I think, you know, the likes of the kids in the universities and stuff like that now that are handing in their thesis, be brave and put it in, and because it's the only way you're going to implement change. Because in, you know, at a base level, a foundation level within the industries, they're going to fob us off as much as they can. And I think when people understand as well that the likes of the books that we read from, you know, the education books, the books that are taught, you know, in universities that teach our surgeons and our doctors and our GPs have very little, you know, in terms of plant-based nutrition. They go with the norm, they go with, you know, the overall belief. And, you know, so it's really to be brave in that and to stand your ground and to, you know, to say to them, well, maybe you need to broaden your horizons, as opposed to, well, I know better than you do. Because then you go, no, where, well, I have the credentials and I'm, you know, whatever, the initials at the end of my name, you don't. And that kind of a vibe. But I think it speaks for ourselves as well, you know, in terms of our overall health and, you know, how rare it is that we get sick and things like that. My GP doesn't really see my children. So, you know, that speaks volumes too. So when they do come in, you know, it's generally, it is just for those kind of milestones and those checks. I was asked as well in terms of milestones from my youngest son, because he pretty much went from me nursing him straight onto plant-based milks. And that was a big, like, but how are you going to manage it and how do you know he's getting enough? And I knew he was getting enough just as when he was nursing I knew he was getting enough, because he'd come off and he was satisfied, you know, and he'd latch off himself, and it was the same way as well when he was feeding. I knew he was satisfied, you know, yourself. And I think we need to trust our instincts in terms of being parents, that we are on the right track. But it's the same for you guys, you know, as teenagers as well, to have ownership over your own beliefs and not to be intimidated by a system that's going to tell us that we're wrong, because we're not.
Personally, I go into schools as much as I can to do cooking demos and try and speak to some of the children. And one of the biggest issues is why you won't hear about that in the public education system, is because the people who define the public education system are the same people who are subsidising farmers for making meat. So that's the government. And I'm not saying anarchy, I'm not saying let's not listen to the government, I'm saying the opposite. Some of the most fantastic talks I've been to today are when people say to get involved with your government, to get involved with your community, and to try and affect change. Because we do need that structure in our society. But I'm more about infiltrating the system than denouncing it. So there is going to be a conflict of interest when the government are giving the curriculum to children and they don't want to say something that's against the subsidies that they're also putting into the system. But that's for us to stand up and be that change in our own community and make sure that we get involved with it. So when you're doing the research yourself, you're doing exactly the right thing, and you need to be that change that you need in the system, because no one at the top's going to do it for you unless you shout loud enough, unless you write enough emails and enough letters and be heard. So for me, that's exactly why the system's in the way it is, but we're not going to change it without being a part of it. So it's about infiltrating it rather than rejecting it.
I just want to add something that I experienced myself in Ireland. I did my master's in journalism in Dublin, and from the beginning of the course I knew I wanted to tackle how veganism was approached by the media. And when it got to the point that I had to define my research, I was told, if you focus on that, you'll find nothing to study, because especially the Irish newspapers, they won't cover it. So you might have to change the subject a bit. And I was like, but how? I don't want to go away from that. I want to bring some sort of it. So what I did is I covered food, how food is covered in the Irish newspapers, and then we would say the lack of articles about veganism. So that was the approach, and then exactly I didn't find much. Most of it was in a negative way. But my research was all done in the historical of the media, how the media doesn't do it, what we need to change, and even like the cultural or the sociological aspects of that. And as they said before about the changing the laws, changing cultures, it's a long way, but it is about keep pushing and just believing that those subjects should be there. You know, like I have friends in Brazil that they go to veterinary schools and they're vegan. They will skip the subjects and they will fight to be approved without having to do tests on animals in the schools. It is a big fight. As I said, like we live in a normal...
Per year is the global average. Like in Ireland, we're about 100. So they're advocating a move to 20 kilograms. So that would be like 80% reductions in Europe, North America, and stuff like that. So groups like Greenpeace, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, there's a lot of reports just targeting the massive impact of grazing, which is about, like, of all the agricultural land, most of it is for animal agriculture. So you'll find on our website, Vegan Sustainability, there's an awful lot of peer-reviewed articles coming out. So have a look at that. There's groups like Climate Vegan, focusing on climate change issues. There's groups like Truth or Drought, focusing from the water angle. So really, in academia now, there's a lot coming out. So there's a lot of resources there.
I'll keep this short. That's my apology for speaking again after speaking not long ago. But the direct answer to your question, and the direct answer here's a question for everybody. What is our number one problem as vegans? What is the number one problem? But what is the number one structural problem? The number one structural problem is cultural speciesism. And that's the answer. That we talked about legislation and politicians, and we talked about academia. Those places are full of speciesists. That's the answer, that's the problem.
Okay, thank you. We have run right over, I'm afraid to say, because we could probably talk to